Hello, this is Justin Matthew. Welcome to Second Nature. Environment is a key concept. We are all familiar with this term in our daily engagement. If you go to a school classroom, you have a compulsory course on environmental studies. And when you come to college or university, there you have specialized environmental sciences, environmental social sciences courses. And we also have environmental history. When you go to an environmental history classroom, one of the immediate doubt students have, or generally all of us have, is to differentiate environment and ecology. What is the difference? Or why do we use the phrase environmental history, not the history of the environment? These are some of concern that we need to address as a part of discussion on environmental history. Can we consider ecology and environment as synonyms, or are they overlapping? Should we write ecological history or environmental history, or should we use them interchangeably? So today's discussion, we are going to discuss the meaning of that concept environment. And we are also going to discuss a historical context of the formation of that concept, the environment, the context of contemporary society. And we also will try to trace a debate around that concept, environment. We know that in our everyday use, the term environment refers to surroundings or milieu, setting, or habitat, or ecosystem, or a sociocultural context. And we use the term environment in many contexts to refer to physical environment like landform, rivers, mountains, and other structures. Then we also use the term environment in the context of cities, infrastructures, that is called built environment. Then we have a socio-cultural environment. There we refer to heritage or our tradition or practices. Then we also refer in our daily context, daily interaction, the terms like work environment. There we are referring to the company culture or our labor laws and related terms. Now, when we come to environmental history, what is the context? What is the meaning of that term environment in that specific context? We need to remember that environmental history as a discipline is not limited to historians. We have many other disciplines and scholars practicing environmental history as a knowledge field. For instance, we have geographers studying environmental history. For a geographer, environmental history is a lens to understand territoriality of power, for instance. They study state spaces and spatiality of social structure. That means, they understand landscape as an archive. Landscape can speak. For instance, past landscape of mine in the context of Rajasthan help us to study a state formation, economy of that particular region. Then geographers use the term environment to study everyday geographies of social life. If you are a farmer, or if you are a pastoralist, or if you live a life of a fisher folk, so that help us to understand everyday geography. Basically, a geographer try to understand human nature interaction or co-production of human and as well as nature. That means, a geographer understands environment not merely as a backdrop, but an active force, as an active agent that shapes our everyday life, that shapes our state systems. And when we come to ecology as a discipline, Ecologists practice environmental history. When they study environmental history, their concern is to understand species dynamics. They study ecosystem, and they also study biodiversity. When they examine environmental history element, so their immediate problem is to understand how human activity transform nature, transform ecosystem. For instance, they study capitalist appropriation of nature and its commodification, and how commodification of nature disrupt nutrient cycle and affect biodiversity. How monoculture transform biodiversity and ecosystem balance. For instance, in Indian context, we have a wonderful example to study ecologists practicing environmental history. So I'm sure some of us are familiar with Madhav Gadgil and Ramchandra Guha's work, This Fissured Land, an Ecological History of India. So this is a great attempt to integrate archival research and field work. And in the study, Madhav Gadgil brings in that ecological dimension to understand the long history of sociocultural formation and to understand different modes of organizing life. And when we come to another important discipline, political science, how political scientists practice environmental history, their immediate concern is to understand how state engagement, state policies, or international organizations and their interventions shape environmental politics, what we call the politics of nature. For instance, if you study Indian Forest Act of 1865 or the Indian Forest Act of 1878, we study, a political scientist would understand and explain these forest acts as a colonial instrument of control or controlling nature and societies connected to nature. For instance, one can read Amida Bhaviskar's an interesting work that she published in 1995, In the Belly of the River, Tribal Conflict Over Development in the Narmada Valley. So this is the political sociology work that is kind of broadening these disciplines like politics, sociology, and anthropology. So here in the study, Amida Bhaviskar present nature as an active force, as a mutually shaping process, shaping of society and nature. So in all these subject fields, we can see a concept, environment, as a key term. If environment is a key term in all these disciplinary practices of environmental history, is there any common link that interconnect a historian or a sociologist or a political scientist or a geographer who practice environmental history? We know that most of them, all these studies engage with local manifestation or a local incident or a local landscape. But at the same time, all of them indicate a global implication of any local development. So that means, when we imagine an ecosystem destruction or anything related to nature or ecological transformation, we tend to imagine an apocalyptic moment, end of the world moment. Especially, when we come to our time, especially the time of the concept of Anthropocene necessarily comes with that image of what we call apocalyptic, end of the world. For instance, when you search the term environment online, go to Wikipedia or Wikimedia Commons and see this image. One of the initial image suggested by Wikimedia Commons is this one. So this is a image that tells us how air pollution, how factory-related destruction of river or river ecosystem, leads to what we call a slow catastrophe, gradual, collapse of our living surrounding. That gradual collapse of or slow catastrophe has a global implication. So, environment as a key term refers to integrative whole. When you imagine local, that provides us an opportunity to imagine a global integrative whole. That is different from a earlier understanding, earlier meaning of the term. That is a simple surrounding and environment of a story, surrounding environment of a condition. That's the meaning of the term, the transformation of that term. At the same time, we also need to remember that the concept ecology refers to a scientific discipline that studies interconnectedness, while environment is a way to understand, a dimension to imagine the planet or the global interconnectedness. So we can trace this idea of environment back to Second World War. Second World War was a moment of catastrophe that led to massive destruction of cities, of built structures, and also nature. Second World War was a moment when we realized that science is not going to take humanity to highest or height of civilization. We understood that science can equally be destructive in its intervention. Some of us know an important intervention made by Rachel Carson in her 1962 work, Silent Spring. In Silent Spring, Rachel Carson argued that the use of chemicals and use of pesticide lead to a condition, lead to a kind of massive destruction of nature. That's a key moment. That's an important intervention, intellectual intervention that redefined the concept environment as a global integrative whole, as a warning signal, as a way to understand our own, living system. But at the same time, we need to remember that Rachel Carson was not the first person to, introduce an intellectual revolution in the concept of environment. For instance, if you read William Vogt's Road to Survival, that was published in 1947, presented a planetary concern called environmental destruction in the context of World War II. Let me quote from William Vogt's masterpiece work, Road to Survival. That work invoked a planetary concern while discussing the story of ecological destruction. So I quote him, "The cost of modern war, as well as the cost of peaceful living, has risen so sharply that we have built a structure of indebtedness that is a danger to our entire economic structure." Then in a later paragraph he continues, "Since our real wealth, as opposed to the production of government printing presses, is drawn from the earth, is always limited to quantities, as minerals, food, wood, water, and wildlife, destruction of the earth's surface, and waste of its product have a cogent meaning that touches the life, today, tomorrow, and every human being." So here, Vogt is referring to that concept, environment, as we understand today. And he's expanding that concept, its meaning, as a global concept, or provides a global dimension to that concept. Let me quote how he provides a global dimension to that concept. So he writes, it is imperative that business, intellectual, and governmental leaders throughout the world understand the dependence of man on his environment and the complex, ever-changing relationship with that environment. So he is making a appeal to the whole world to have a consciousness called environment, an ethical consciousness. So when we refer to that ethical consciousness, one should mention another important work by a great ecologist, Aldo Leopold. Aldo Leopold published a Sand County Almanac and Sketches Here and There in 1949. So in that study, he introduces a concept called land ethic. What do we mean by land ethic concept, Aldo Leopold? So he reframed the idea of considering nature as a resource base. Instead, he argues that we need to understand nature as a community where landforms, animals, as well as human beings belong. That means he's referring to an interdependent global whole, integrative whole. And Aldo Leopold is an important intervention. Land ethic is an important intellectual intervention because subsequently this concept influenced deep ecology, ecofeminism, and environmental justice. All these perspectives. But at the same time, while considering the Second World War context and post-Second World War, Cold War, nuclear, competition context of the concept environment, we also need to acknowledge that this is the context when environment emerged as a domain of experts. For instance, if you read an important intervention by Paul Vade in his recently published 2021 published work, The Environment, A History of Idea. So he would argue that Paul Vade would argue that consider this element, understanding the environment as a domain of expert, is an important dimension in that the way we understand that field. So we understand environment as a field of science or scientific expert. Timothy Michel used that term, rule of experts. Right. So that means we understand environment as countable and predictable. So this is again a post-war dimension that we are adding to that concept environment. We can even go back to pre-war period, New Deal era, role of experts in the context of American intervention in that sand bowl. But an important intervention was made by Stalin, Russian ruler Stalin, when they published Stalin's great plan for the transformation of nature. Stalin's great plan for transformation of nature considered, landscape as a machine. He's referring to industrial agriculture. So something that need to be planned, controlled, and extracted by, with the help of experts. So that is evident in our own, intellectual thinking. For instance, if you read India's second 5-year plan, let me quote from India's second 5-year plan, an important intervention in defining nature as a domain of experts. So I quote from the 1956 published second 5-year plan. It defines, I quote, development is a process of utilizing more and more effectively the resources of the community in the furtherance of accepted ends. These resources are in part given by nature, but they can and have to be transformed by the application of new skills and know-how. So that's again a domain of expert. And when you read, slightly later, earlier published, 1952 published Government of India's report of National Forest Policy, National forest policy of Government of India considered forest as a resource frontier that has to be used for environmental well-being of society at large, for nation's good. So, and a similar, the trend was quite evident globally. For instance, if you read the United Nations Scientific Conference on the Conservation and Utilization of Resources that was published in 1947, that also asks us to think globally. Think of globally means think about conservation. Conservation as the logic to understand our surrounding, our planet. So, and in the subsequent decades, when we come to 1970s, 1980s, and later, the idea of environment is entangled largely with environmental justice concept. It further redefined that meaning of the term environment in the context of powerful social environmental movements that happened in the 1970s and later. So therefore, now we understand environment as a concern that help us to imagine a radical social change globally. We understand environment as a angle, a dimension to locate our time critically and historically as a history of capitalism, as a justice question as well. So therefore, in the next video lecture, we are going to discuss, elaborate that concept, environmental justice in the context of neoliberal capitalism. Thank you.